Thank you so much, Brody. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the final session for the Reshape Our Future Youth Sector Conference. My name is Maya. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a young peer facilitator here with YACVic. And it's my pleasure to guide you through our very last session. I can't believe it's the last one. But over the past few days, I have learned so much and heard from such diverse voices on topics like finding decent work for young people, empowering young people in spaces of peace and connection. We also had a chat about sexual health, and we had a discussion on how we as youth workers messed up and how we can do better. And to wrap our conference, we thought it would be really important to talk about what is coming over the horizon. So what do we see in our future as young people? And how can we shape it to make it our own? For me, I can definitely see that there are a few issues that are on the rise for young people. Most importantly, for one example, is climate change. I know that there are heaps of young people like me who are really passionate about climate justice, who have been hit pretty hard with the recent news from the IPCC. But I've also seen those young people mobilize change through so many opportunities and become activists in the climate justice space. And that just sparks so much hope and inspiration for all young people out there to keep fighting. And to add to that inspiration, we've got with us 3 future thinkers today. They'll be sharing with us what they see coming in the future of young people. So to get us started, I think there is a Menti that will be shared in the chat. And we really want you to tell us what you see over the horizon. So if there are any, specific challenging issues that you think young people are facing right now, that you think are important to address, and what type of opportunities are available for us to overcome these challenges. And as I've said before, we're really lucky to have 3 speakers with us, and we'll also hopefully have some time for Q&A. So if you've got any questions throughout their presentations, just pop them in the chat throughout the session. First off, we've got Sonia, Arakkal, and then we've got Claire O'Brien and Mel Fineberg. And then last but not least, we've got Levi McKenzie-Kirkbright. Our first speaker is Sonia. So Sonia is a co-founder of Think Forward, a lobby group for young Australians advocating for intergenerational fairness in the tax and transfer system. Once again, Think Forward recognises that successive federal governments have failed to act in the long-term economic interests of young people and aims to keep the interests of the people at the forefront of conversations about tax and economy policy. Think Forward is leading a coalition of youth organisations, economists and the civil sector to call for a parliamentary inquiry into economic intergenerational fairness. Thank you so much, Sonia, for joining us today.
Thanks, Maya. Hello, everybody. I am calling in from Noongar Whadjuk here in Perth in Western Australia. I am wearing a black shirt. I have brown skin. I use she, her pronouns. I have black hair, and I am sitting in a light room, very excited to speak to you about my ideas about the future that affect young people and the youth sector who work so hard for them. I thought, as well as going into the issue of intergenerational fairness, I would touch on 3 trends that I think will affect young people into the future. In my acknowledgement to country, I want to also mention First Nations philosophy and how they bring in generational thinking into their leadership and custodian of lands. I think that thinking is what we talk about at Think Forward and want to see happen in a Parliament House as well. So in the spirit of generational thinking, the trends that I'm going to speak to are at slightly longer timelines. I'd first like to talk about the effect of longevity and how that is going to change our economy and what that means for young people. I'd then like to touch on global uncertainty, especially the geopolitical kind, and why that's relevant to young people in the youth sector. And then finally, about the fragmentation of culture through technology. But I might start with longevity. So when we talk about intergenerational fairness, what we're really talking about is the disruption that 21st century lifespans is to our way of thinking, working, living in a community, and participating in an economy. Now, don't get me wrong, I think longevity is a good thing, but it has real impacts for how we tax and how we spend. In Australia, we know that the largest population is in the over 60s branch. And with growing, lowering birth rates, it's true that we are not replacing our population as it grows. So if we live in a world with a growing aging population and a shrinking younger one, this has implications for not just our economy, but also power. So at Think Forward, our work focuses a lot on how our tax system is reliant on young working people. And more we see that working age taxpayers are underwriting the living standards of older Australians to a much greater extent than they had in the past. To a certain extent, this is the bad luck of young people born today or in the millennial and Gen Z generation, but this is being made worse by unjust tax breaks and concessions that flow to people who own assets, who are wealthy retirees or the corporate sector. And this global pandemic has required a vast sum of money to be paid in stimulating the economy. Whether you agree or whether that that debt represents a good or bad investment by government, what is true is that repaying that debt is going to be the responsibility of younger and future generations. And it's also true that increasingly that money isn't being spent on long-term infrastructure or services for young people. Another impact of longevity on the Australian economy is power. So even though in Australia our older generations are the wealthiest in history, they are all, because they are the wealthiest in our history, there are powerful lobby groups that, organize to protect their favorable tax settings at the expense of younger generations. And it is increasingly harder when the population size of younger cohorts are shrinking to be able to change that. And we see that when we look at our direct political representation in Parliament. So did you know that in the 1990s, 7.6% of members in Canberra were under 35, but today the share of politicians under the age of 35 is a measly 2.6%. This is despite the fact that 15 to 35-year-olds make up around 29% of the population. So longevity is a good thing, but it has implications for how we tax, and it also has implications for which groups have power in society to change issues like tax. But it's not all bad news. I think there is some silver linings to be talked about. One is that a population of people under 30 is currently the same as those in the over 60 bracket. And in 12 years' time, the voting age population under 30 will take over those of 60. So that means when you talk, when young people are out there advocating about the issues they care about, climate change, like Maya said, or the youth sector is, talking to funding or the important work that they do, in 12 years' time, it's going to be a really compelling argument to politicians to say, you really need to think about young people in Australia, not just chase the grey vote. I'll probably leave the comments there other than to say we are interrogating this idea of intergenerational fairness in policymaking, especially though in our economy at Think Forward. And if you're interested, do look up our work around the inquiry into intergenerational fairness that we are looking to set up. We really think we need to have these discussions about how longevity is affecting the tax and power structures, how we engage policymakers in the process of mutual care between the generations, and have that conversation in Parliament House. The next issue that I'd like to talk about is global uncertainty. So I work for Think Forward by night, and by day I work in foreign policy. And increasingly in my day job, we're talking a lot about US-China geopolitical tensions. We've seen that the US government has withdrawn troops from Afghanistan, and there's been increasing examples of hostility between trading partners in our immediate neighborhood. Then, of course, we have the pandemic, and we're not really sure yet how the global pandemic will affect security, but there are some worrying signs. So, for example, at the beginning of the year, we had senior Australian senators, even a secretary of a government department, telling us that going to war in our region is a possibility in the next 15, 20 years. So why am I bringing this up at a youth sector conference? Well, because conflict, and especially conflict that Australia is involved in, is a youth issue. It is our vulnerable young people, often our young men from vulnerable communities, like people like in our regional communities, that get sent to this conflict and put their bodies on the line. As the youth sector, I think it's really important that this is front of mind for young people and for youth workers who might be considering a career in the armed forces. Even if it doesn't get to a point of war in our region, there are other factors that are contributing to global uncertainty. Maya mentioned the IPCC report, and we've talked also about the effect of the global pandemic. Now, how do these kinds of uncertainty affect young people that we work with? Well, on the one hand, I'm a little bit worried about the effect of this uncertainty on our young people's mindsets. Survey after survey talks about how young people today are more than ever scared, and they're anxious and fearful. And I think it's really worrying that we are raising a generation of young people who are likely to act from a place of fear. And often when we act from a place of fear, we're less open to create creative solutions or innovative solutions. On the other hand, I also recognize, and here is the silver lining in this trend, is that it is the young people who are likely to lead the social movements that addresses these global uncertainties. In terms of Australia's place in the region and geopolitical conflict, maybe it's Generation Z that will finally make Australia a republic. On the environmental front, we've seen the Australian school strikes for climate movement, all the great work of organisations like the YACVic about progressing the conversation in Australia. However, I do think we can't underplay the impact that this uncertainty, whether it's war, whether it's climate change, or whether it's the pandemic, is having on our young people, and how much harder we have to work to bring out the resilience or the creativity to help young people lead the social movements to solve these uncertainties. The last topic I'll touch on, and it flows from the previous session, is this whole idea of, in the future, I think young people will be facing a fragmentation of culture. And it's going to be a real challenge to give young people agency within this. So what do I mean by fragmentation of culture? Well, basically what I'm talking about is that technology has changed the way that we provide information and we consume culture. So, once upon a time, we used to all sit in front of a TV, or we would read a magazine, or we would, go down to see a play. But today, culture is consumed through subscriptions. So, for example, you might subscribe to a Substack, or you follow someone on Instagram or TikTok, or you go to Netflix. And this shift from culture consumed together to culture consumed individually is a really important one in how we think about creating community. And I think Yuha's comments here about what youth work is ultimately is about creating community is really important in the context of a place where we have increasingly fragmentized culture, and how much more difficult that prospect is, but at the same time, the kind of opportunities the sector has to engage with young people through different technologies, but also in creating new cultures for the future. I'll leave my comments there. I'd really like to echo the importance of in this new era of fragmented cultures and technologies and platforms like TikTok, how important it is for the future that we create the frameworks around privacy, data security, and also commercial agency, so that young people can, be rewarded for their work on these platforms, but also that they are protected from the things we talked about in the last session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. For some reason, I am unable to start my video. Here we go. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Sonia, for sharing your perspective. I've never really heard about someone talk about the implications of geopolitics and young people, and I found that extremely interesting coming from a politics nerd myself. And I've been writing down some of the notes that you said, and it really is fascinating stuff. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share it with us. Our next speakers are Claire O'Brien and Mel Fineberg. So Claire O'Brien is a youth advocate, international public health student, active volunteer, and member of the Reimagining Young People's Futures Youth Steering Group. She's involved with various organisations, including YACVic, VicHealth, the Public Health Association of Australia, and YACVic. Having a strong involvement in the youth advocacy space, she is passionate about making a change amongst communities, addressing health disparities, and promoting overall well-being amongst young people. Mel Fineberg is the Executive Manager of Social Marketing and Comms at VicHealth. She has more than 20 years marketing and comms experience in the government and non-for-profit sectors throughout Australia and internationally. Whether focused on road safety or workplace safety, health and well-being, or raising funds for life-saving research, Melanie has spent her career leading high-performing teams to deliver work that has a positive impact on people's lives. Thank you so much, Claire and Mel, for joining us today. Take it away.
Thanks, Maya, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank YACVic again for having me here to speak today. I know a lot of hard work has gone into putting this conference together, and despite the setbacks, we're finally here. So yeah, thank you, and I'm very grateful to be here. So as mentioned, my name is Claire. I use she, her pronouns. I have brown hair and I wear a grey, today I'm wearing a grey knitted jumper. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on today. I personally am presenting on the land of the Boonwurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and to any Aboriginal people who may be here today. I was a youth representative involved with VicHealth's Reimagining Young People's Futures project. So this was a co-design project led by 8 youth steering group members. So over the last 6 months or so, I've gotten to know the other steering group members quite well as we've worked together to put together some events along with the team at VicHealth. The purpose of this project was to strengthen young people's voices and to provide input to policymakers around issues that affect our health and well-being. So as I mentioned, we ran some events. We started off with 2 webinars, one looking at the effects of COVID-19 and also social disconnection, and then a second webinar focusing more on racism and allyship. So members of the youth steering group, including myself, spoke about our lived experience these topics. And then following this, we also had the opportunity to meet face-to-face with the Parliamentary Secretary for Youth, Josh Bull. And this was a really great experience. This allowed us to discuss our ideas further and to share our policy asks with him directly. I really enjoyed that meeting. It was, I would say it was the most memorable moment from the whole experience. But what I also really loved about this project and how VicHealth ran the project was that it was very collaborative. The youth steering group was involved in every aspect. So we designed the content that was going to be discussed in the webinars. We planned who would speak when, and the VicHealth staff were amazing and supportive. Knowing that there was support there really helped removing any anxiety that I may have had around speaking at the event, but also putting forward my ideas. So this was a key theme for the project. VicHealth really wanted to embrace youth participation, and I could tell from the very first meeting with the other youth steering group members and the staff in VicHealth directly involved with this project, I could tell that how adaptive and supportive everyone was, and that I was truly valued and that my voice was truly valued. So this sense of being listened to and not being dismissed was really important for me. And in turn, it made me speak up more and raise my ideas and thoughts more often. So I think this is a really key takeaway for everyone here listening today who may be looking at doing some co-design work in future. If you're going to be collaborating with young people, then it's important to make sure that they're listened to, taken seriously, and supported at each step along the way. I found it really beneficial and rewarding to be a part of this project. I gained communication skills and developed new networks, but the most important thing for me was that I was able to share my voice and contribute directly towards influencing policy change for young people. We know that for the majority of youth, disruptions caused by the pandemic occurred around life milestones. So young people are at a stage in life where they may be entering into adulthood, graduating, moving out of home, or they may be in a transition phase, getting new jobs and trying to focus on travel and new relationships. So the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, came at a terrible time for everyone, but I think it really hit young people hard because of these major milestones in life. We know that late adolescence and early adulthood are vital periods for establishing lifelong health behaviours. So going forward, it's really important to ensure that there are programs available to assist young people in recovery. And also, it's important that we invest in general mental health and well-being. So, yeah, it's important to invest in prevention, to make sure that all young people are able to cope and have the best life they can going forward. So I really want to encourage everyone here to embrace collaboration and co-design as a way to include more young people in decision making. I am seeing this more and more. I'm seeing a lot of youth advisory groups being formed and a lot of interest in the youth sector. So that can clearly be evidenced by this conference, and it's really great to see. I just want to finish up by saying that young people are the experts in their own lives and the experts in the unique challenges that we face. So it's important to place us at the center of design and place us at the center of developing youth-focused initiatives. I'm going to now pass over to Mel, who's going to speak a little bit more about what VicHealth is doing in the space of young people. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. And thank you again so much for being part of that initiative. It really meant a lot to us. My name's Mel. As we've said, I use she, her pronouns. I have blonde, curly hair. white skin, purple jumper today, and I'm tuning in from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people out near the Maribyrnong River. Wonderful to be here and such a great opportunity to talk to you about a future initiative that VicHealth is about to launch just next week, which is all about involving young people again and putting young people really at the centre, giving them the opportunity to be part of the solutions of the future. So I am just going to share screen. I know we were talking about technology earlier. I typically use Teams, so please bear with me if I'm a little clunky on Zoom. So hopefully that's working. I can see my screen, but I can't see anyone else now. But as I said, I want to talk to you quickly about Future Healthy, which is a new initiative. This is here we go. At VicHealth, we have a vision of Victoria where no young person is denied a future that is healthy. We know that lots of people have been impacted and are still continuing to be impacted, of course, by bushfires and the pandemic, which is very much on our minds at the moment. But we also see that that gives us a once in a generation opportunity to really build back better and fairer, and we're taking it, and that's Future Healthy. So we will be investing $45 million over the next 3 years to create a Victoria where we see vibrant communities, where people are connected socially, where they're active in their neighbourhoods in the ways that suit them, and where they enjoy wholesome food, and that combined, that really makes them feel great. I have a little hype video that I'll play for you just to introduce the initiative. Oh, and of course this worked when we trialed it before. All right, I will just talk to it instead of showing you the video. Look, Future Healthy is all about, as I said, we've got this investment, we've got $45 million to create a future that is healthy for all Victorians and for young Victorians in particular, who we know have been hardest hit in recent times. But we want to know from young Victorians themselves what they envisage as a future that is healthy. What does that mean to them? And how can we help? Where do we put our investments? Where do we put our dollars? You know, of course, we have some evidence-based and research and experience, but we want to combine that with lived experience because you're the ones that really know. So how can you, everybody here today, help support Future Healthy? What we're starting with next week is hearing from young people right across the community. We want you to help us gather those stories, and we want to hear from diverse young people, diverse experiences. We want to hear from all corners of the community right across Victoria, no matter your postcode, your bank balance, your background, your ability. We want to hear from you about your experiences, your challenges, your ideas of what you think would create a better Victoria and a healthier community for you to live in. So what you can do, please head to the website futurehealthy.vichealth.vic.gov.au, and you can find out more about the initiative. You can register for our email updates so that you don't miss out when we're moving through over the next 3 years. And you can follow us on social media, of course, for updates as well. I will stop sharing and I can see everyone again. So yes, and the team at YACVic will put the video on the conference platform. So if you want to watch that back to get more information, then please do so. But so amazing to be here today. Thanks again to Claire and to everyone in the YACVic team. And hopefully you'll help us make Future Healthy really come to life and help design the solutions of the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mel. Future Healthy sounds like an amazing initiative, and I'm sure YACVic would love to get on board in any way possible. And thank you so much, Claire. I really like the takeaway message of centering young people in, co-designing programs and reassuring them that their lived experience is what makes them experts. Just a reminder that we've got the Menti link in the chat. So we really encourage you to answer the Menti questions about the challenges that you think young people will face in the future and what opportunities lie for young people in the future as well. So I see Steph's just popped it in the chat there. Now, our final speaker of the day is Levi McKenzie-Kirkbright. So Levi is a Gadigal and Youin man living in Melbourne. He is currently completing his Masters of Engineering and working as a software engineer at a legal technology startup. In 2019, Levi was sponsored by the Koori Youth Council to be the 2019 Young Thinker in Residence at the YACVic. Thank you so much, Levi, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be back talking to Sam and the team for YACVic. Yeah, so as was mentioned, I'm a Gadigal and Youin man, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners across the country, wherever you might be. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have T-minus 9.5 minutes to do this, so I'll make my best shot. So I've called my presentation Existential Hope, a young technologist cure to its 21st century doom and gloom. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that there's a lot of amazing discussion around the problems that exist, but to finish on a good note, I think it's really important that we keep our eyes up and keep an open attitude towards the future, an open attitude of problem solving and optimism that we can actually overcome some of these challenges that have been highlighted by our other speakers. So technology, I became obsessed with technology, I guess when I was young, through science. And I kind of wondered, like, what exactly is technology? Kind of feel like we take it for granted. There's a really famous guy, Alan Kay, you can go look him up, in the technology industry. And he said, technology is anything that was invented after you were born. And I think that's very funny, but I wasn't really convinced by that. So I spent the last like 2 years or so, even though I'm studying software engineering, actually trying to figure out what is technology. So I want to talk about the default mode of humans, I think, which I'd call sort of existential dread or pessimism. So does anybody know what this graph is? That's what I'd be asking if this was more interactive. But if you can guess what this graph is, what these boxes might be covering up. This is a graph that a man named Thomas Malthus made in the 1800s, where he basically plotted a linear increase in food production and what he called geometric, or we'd call now like exponential increase in population. And he predicted a point of crisis where basically we'd have like mass starvation and all this, bad stuff happening. And I think this is the default mode because it's very easy for humans to like sort of look out into the future and take all the things that are wrong with the world and just extrapolate them and just go, oh yes, things are going to get worse. And not think about the ways that we might stop those things from getting worse or even make things better. Oops. So I've got a question for you. What is the scarcest resource in the universe? It's not gold. It's not even diamonds. I'll give you a little riddle to help you along. It's older than mountains, but born every day. Birds need me to fly, but I'm invisible to the eye. I shape the planet. I may even be found amongst the stars. I'm inside everything that lives. And I build people, planes, animals, and cars. I even made you, but you can make me too. Is that coming up? And you might think that it's something to do with the Amazon rainforest, for example. I had a whole bunch of slides, but Seb made me get rid of them because I've only got 7 minutes now. Well, the answer is knowledge. It's not exactly life. It's not exactly some other possible answers to that riddle. But what do I mean by knowledge? Well, in the first instance, what makes life is genetic knowledge. The genes that have encoded older than mountains, the genomes, the earliest life was probably about 4 billion years old, was probably 4 billion years ago. which means that there's some genes that exist in us, in every single human and every single animal, that could be 1, 2, 3 billion years old, that are shared between bacteria, shared between animals, shared between plants. And that knowledge encoded in genes builds organisms from one generation to the next, builds another generation, and the information encoded in your genes have been around for billions of years and has actually shaped the planet. But there's another type of knowledge, which is the part that is about, I build planes and cars, as well as animals and humans. And knowledge in general, we have genetic knowledge, but we also have what humans can do, which is explanatory knowledge, or scientific knowledge, or mathematical knowledge, or artistic knowledge, or just creativity in general. And so the reason why Thomas Malthus was incorrect and why we didn't have a complete population catastrophe was because we created new knowledge. Specifically, amongst many other things, but in particular, we created this thing called the Haber process, which was a way that we can basically get nitrogen out of the air and use it for fertilizer. There are a lot of other reasons, for example, creating new crop species, but we created new knowledge and we solved that problem. And in fact, in certain parts of the world, we have so much food that we actually have the opposite problem, which we have people eating too much food. So knowledge creation is an important principle. It's unpredictable. It turns predictions into prophecies, and it delivers asymmetric returns. And the most important principle to realize with knowledge creation in technology and engineering is that any system that involves the creation of new knowledge is inherently unpredictable, because if we could create new knowledge, if we could predict the new knowledge that needs to be created, we would already have that knowledge to solve a problem. And here's an example: Boris Yeltsin in 1989 going into an American supermarket and just being astounded by the amount of food they had. And I think Yeltsin would disagree with Mr. Malthus at this point in history. So technology and engineering, what I do. Specifically, it's putting our knowledge, in particular science, so physical knowledge, and mathematics, so knowledge of abstract entities, into artifacts, structures, and systems. And this is where it brings me to optimism, and existential optimism in particular. We have an axis, what I call the axes of contention. There's optimism versus pessimism. Default mode is on the right, and what I'd call rational optimism on the left. Default mode, I've gone them the wrong way around. Default mode, I think, is irrational, and optimism is rational. However, there's an important point, which is the world doesn't magically become better by default. People have to wake up and make the decision to go and invent things, to go and create new knowledge, to go and apply that knowledge to solve real world problems. So that's where you have to be proactive. And then there's conformity versus contrarianism. Unfortunately, it's the case, I think, that it can be very contrarian at times to be an optimist, to say, actually, the world can be better and I can make it better, and I can be an active participant in making the world a better place. And that actually the world isn't going to hell in a handbasket. So there's 4 axioms of rational optimism that I've taken from the readings that I've put at the end. The first axiom is that problems will always exist. There's no such thing as utopia. Even in a country like Australia, where we have clean drinking water and access to affordable food, and most people have housing, there's still disparities within Australia. And there's also other parts of the world where they don't have those things. But even in the future, when we've solved all those things for everyone on the planet, there'll be new problems. The second axiom is that problems are soluble. And this is the optimistic part. No matter what the problem is, using human creativity and having an open attitude towards the future, we can progress. And we redefine progress from going towards some sort of made up utopia towards into progress as moving on to better problems. We as Australians in most parts of Australia don't have to worry about clean drinking water because we've solved that problem. But now we move on to other problems. And it's better to have certain problems than to have others. The third principle is that the universe is our infinite home. There are infinite resources, but there are only finite creative beings, as in people. And fourthly, creative problem solving is our only hope. Anything that does not break the laws of physics is possible with knowledge and technology and sufficient wealth. So openness. We need openness in the form of curiosity, so openness towards the world, openness towards the future, which means courage, and openness towards one another, which means compassion. I'm going to finish on a quote by my favorite philosopher with my last 30 seconds. His name is Karl Popper, and he's very important in the philosophy of science. He says, "We need to not accept that there is a historical tendency of things to become worse. The future depends on us. It is we who bear all the responsibility. For this reason, it is our duty to remain optimists. The future is open. It is not predetermined. The possibilities that lie in the future are infinite. When I say it is our duty to remain optimists, this includes not only openness towards the future, but also that which all of us contribute to it by everything that we do. We are all responsible for what the future holds in store. Thus, it is our duty not to prophesy evil, but rather to fight for a better world." And if you would like to find out more about technologist rational optimism, here's a bunch of books that you can read, and they will explain to you this grand experiment that we're doing. So that's me. I think the future is very good, and I hope you do too. Thank you.